Hello again, and welcome back to class. So, chapter 5 now, we're heading into changing the way we teach. So, in the first chapter of the book, the textbook author invited us to consider changing the way that we think about teaching. And as we've gone throughout the course, we have explored this kind of new paradigm or this different paradigm. And of course, I've talked about my experiences working in a couple different institutions and what I have done and what I see others do. And we've also reflected upon, what we see described as strategies used in undergrad classes. A lot of the examples provided in this textbook have been looking at how to transform education, especially at the undergrad level. And so how can we, their mindset is how can we make education something more that is more meaningful to prepare people versus just kind of a survey of different classes. And again, I think back to when I was a student working on a business degree and also taking my science prerequisites for physical therapy school. There were courses during the first couple of years of my academic program, the initial introductory courses, which at times didn't feel like they had any meaning or value. But of course, as you got into the science classes, things came alive more, especially with all the lab components. And with the business classes, there were the practical things, the group work, the uh, doing a study of a business, the business plan development. So there was definitely that stuff. And I think what again the textbook authors attempting to do here is show that you can take potentially any class that may not seem like it could have an experiential component to it, help to bring it alive. Now, let's kind of keep exploring here in this chapter. So, question one, is it really possible to change teaching in a way that will both achieve the kinds of learning described in the taxonomy of significant learning and build the kinds of courses that exemplify the principles of good course design? And Fink's answer is yes, this kind of student learning can be achieved. Question two, but can I do it? Now, again, this may not apply to us, as you all potentially could be working in occupational therapy programs. Myself in a physical therapy program, we are kind of by definition building or preparing people to take on these clinical jobs that have lots of skills that they need to learn. So, question two for the people here is, but can I do it? And the challenge of changing the way that people teach over years sounds quite difficult, but the answer is yes, change can occur. And it's difficult sometimes to make changes when you have ingrained patterns of behavior. Oftentimes, people teach the way that they were taught, or they teach the way they've observed others. But it's useful to remember that it's not a matter of changing everything, only some things. So, like in my pathophysiology class that I teach, I'm not doing all problem based learning, but I am doing some group work. So, there's still the delivery of content in the traditional way, and then there is a way of people kind of doing the applied learning or the kind of self exploration, seeing that there's a particular patient problem, understanding maybe kind of the interdisciplinary component, how an MD or a nurse practitioner may approach that patient, and kind of understanding the patient more globally. Question three, what does it look like when people change how they teach? Can you give us a model? And the answer from Fink is yes. This chapter contains a detailed description of one professor who deliberately and intentionally undertook to change the way they've been teaching for years. This description includes some of the key conversations that Fink and that teacher had, the insights that we developed, the dead ends we ran into, the changes he made, and the impact of those changes on students. Question four, if I do make the changes suggested here, will it really make a significant difference in what happens in the course, or will it just end up being much ado about nothing after all the smoke clears away? And the preliminary answer is you will eventually have to decide whether the change you see is enough to matter to you. But numerous teachers have now redesigned courses that result with results that are substantial and exciting. So the first question Finks wants to address is whether it's really possible to achieve exciting kinds of learning described in Chapter 2. To most readers, having such learning occur on a regular basis sounds like a dream, one that is perhaps too good to be true. Fink has drawn material from published descriptions of 22 courses in which teachers are already accomplishing significant kinds of learning and share analysis here in Exhibit 5. Now, as we go through this chapter, there's going to be times where I'm going to have you just kind of read components of the chapter. And we'll just try to have some discussion because, as mentioned before, this is kind of a conversation between Fink and it's kind of like a case study between Fink and another professor. So here, looking at these selected courses that promote significant learning, well, let's take a couple that are related to us. So, for example, in nursing, topic of cultural issues in childbearing. Students use films and books to explore the ethical and cultural issues of childbearing for women and their families, as well as for nurses themselves. Or for medicine, problem-based learning curriculum where students work in small groups on realistic patient problems and learn how to solve new medical problems. So those would be things similar to what we might do. So to make this list here, Fink is basically talking about that the teacher succeeded in promoting learning that went beyond foundational knowledge and included important aspects of active learning. And so examples that, active learning, past couple weeks, I have kind of guest lectured in a few different classes that I don't lead teaching on, but classes on cervical and thoracic exercise within the orthopedic class. And I was trying to integrate for that class things that students have learned before with exercise strategies that they have not been exposed to, and also tried to bring about cases for them to kind of work on in small groups to discuss. I gave some guided questions and then came back into the large group setting. Now, this particular cohort isn't very good about sharing stuff, and so you have to call upon people. So it's not as robust as a discussion as I'd like, but it was an opportunity for them to not only practice learning from each other and exploring a case that came from one of my textbooks, but also a chance for them to kind of physically try out new techniques within the lab component of the class. The other class, I was teaching blood flow restriction training, and so there was, of course, the time devoted to kind of talking about how it's used clinically at this time, but then setting up opportunities for students to practice. So yeah, the students got a chance to practice again, and since this was more of an introductory course in the first year, gave them kind of examples to try out for the application of the technique. Now, as talked about in Chapter 2, the phrase learning how to learn has three distinct meanings: how to be a better student, how to conduct inquiry and construct knowledge in certain disciplines or fields, and how to be a self-directing learner. A number of teachers in this set of 22 courses created ways to promote each of these versions. So here is an example from a business class, and I'll let you read through that. I'm going to give kind of 5 seconds of dead air before moving on to the next one. So I'm not going to talk about each one of these here. I think this gives you an opportunity to read through it. I don't know if there's things that we can pull from it, if the examples are too much specific to a field that's not directly ours, but you can go ahead and read through that there. And down below here, looking at learning how to inquire and construct knowledge in a biology class. So a second meaning of learning how to learn is for students to learn how to engage in inquiry and the construction of knowledge in a certain domain of human endeavor. Several courses deliberately supported this kind of learning. For example, students in biology, geology, and chemistry courses are all asked to formulate questions and then to work on answering them. The latter part of this task requires students to learn how to search for and identify relevant information and then to analyze that information in order to answer a question or solve a problem. So that one would think would be a good example for us in physical therapy and occupational therapy. What I might try to do is have a student choose a particular medical diagnosis and then ask the question, what would be the role of physical therapy or an occupational therapy to address deficits associated with or dysfunctions associated with that diagnosis? And then to try to find evidence that would support the particular strategy. Now looking at becoming self-directing learners, although none of the courses in the sample focus explicitly on helping students become self-directing learners, several do pay direct attention to the learning process. For example, the subject of the education course is obviously teaching and learning, but this course also asks the students to reflect on their own learning as well and prompts them to explore the impact of their own learning process on how they should teach in the future. Now, I think becoming a self-directing learner, this could be something that is done very easily in our fields. I know the instructor of the modalities class, there are topics that aren't taught that are passive treatments that physical therapists might do. And some of these, maybe you might consider them more alternative or things that maybe lack a lot of evidence. And so it gives students a chance to kind of explore something and learn that process of, again, finding information and learning about it. And then they go about then in a 5-minute presentation, sharing those findings with fellow classmates in class. I'll let you read this one here and take a few seconds to go through this. I'm looking at the topic of caring now, and I think that's something that maybe a lot of our students inherently have, is that gene that cares for other people. So you can read through the example here, but I think one way that we are able to really facilitate and foster that caring is through not necessarily role-playing situations, but bringing people in from the community and having students interact with them in supervised clinical situations, and then later having kind of reflection discussion topics, finding out from the student's perspective, what they learned from that situation, what they saw as things that were positively or that were impactful. um, what's going to help that patient have success? What are potential barriers to them having success? What are the things that we can provide as physical therapists and occupational therapists? So please feel free to pause the recording and read through these. Following again is a list of examples that show how the general pattern works helps students care about what they're learning about in different kinds of courses. And so these don't necessarily apply or to us, or maybe these examples aren't really great, but if you want to look through them, you can. The nursing class, this is one that maybe is a little closer to what we do. Human dimension, when teachers want students to enhance their human interaction capabilities, they have to find ways to help them become more self-aware and other-aware in relation to the subject being studied. Sometimes the activities used are especially effective in helping students learn about themselves or about others, but more often students find that learning about either one helps them learn about both. So again, they're talking about simulated roles or imaginary situations. We do a lot of real world stuff. If you want to read through this one, go ahead and do so. I'm going to give you some dead air and then you can move forward from there. Now looking at integration, several of the courses described in the case studies generate integration kinds of learning, although they differ in the terms of what they are connecting. Generally, integration is accomplished in a two-part sequence. First, students have to learn about each of the subjects being connected. Second, students have to give focused attention to making the connections. In some cases, this means just comparing two or more subjects, that is, identifying similarities and differences. In others, attention is focused on the interaction among two or more subjects. When learning about different subjects, in the first part of this sequence, students engage in the usual activities of reading or listening to lectures, and sometimes in a special form of a doing experience, such as field-based activities, lab work, complex projects, and the like. In the second part, students have to engage in thinking, writing, reflecting, and in small group or whole class discussions. Again, a lot of the things we do, there is integration between the courses. When you think about especially the first year courses, how they provide a foundation for the clinical courses that often occur in the second year. If you'd like to read through these, please go ahead and pause the recording now. Same thing, pause the recording. Application now. Many of the courses described in the literature on college teaching were selected in part because they devised special means for promoting some kind of application. And again, application is everything that we do, practicing those techniques. So, looking now here in thinking abilities, critical thinking is what we try to do probably a vast majority of the time, right? When it comes to doing an evaluation on a patient and figuring out what needs to be done to get them where they need to go. Creative thinking, I oftentimes think that OTs do a really great job of that with trying to help out the home environment to make it work for that patient, to rig something, a splint, something like that, to work for the person. Skills, other courses offer students opportunities to develop a number of skills, often related to communication. You can read through this if you'd like. We do a lot of skill work, right, with, joint mobilization techniques, exercise, prescription, helping people with bed mobility, with transfers. Now looking at foundational knowledge, Fink's assumptions that all courses, good or bad, make some provision for covering their stated subject matter. Nonetheless, there is still an important question about learning foundational knowledge, given the fact that some courses spend all their time and energy on supporting only one kind of learning. We need to know how the courses described here manage to free up time for other kinds of significant learning without abandoning the goal of also furthering foundational knowledge. Presumably, they have to create some alternative way for students to move on to more significant kinds of learning. And again, this is, a big challenge, I think, for undergrad stuff. We've got the ability to have our foundational knowledge, not only stuff that people have done as their prerequisite coursework, but also within the first year of the program, they're doing a lot of this foundational work that's going to then launch them into their clinical coursework within their second year. Now, here talking about making better use of out of class time, this really becomes a challenge, though, in graduate school, and it's something that we've struggled with, where we want people to really do deep dives, and so we've assigned them too much stuff, and we forget that they also have 4 or 5 other courses, and they just run out of time to do things. So maybe this is easier at the undergrad level where, a 3 credit class is going to class 3 hours a week, and they maybe have 4 classes and they've got, a total of 15 credits out of that. And some of them are challenging classes and some of them aren't. But then when you're in graduate school, all the classes are challenging, all the classes have a large component to it. So you've got to be a little bit more aware of people's times. But content can be provided in different forms. And one big way is obviously how we are talking about things right now, and that is doing things online. So giving some material to the students to work on in a flipped classroom type of setting, listen to a lecture, and then come into the class and do all the hands-on work. That's a great thing. Let you read through this, linking the content to other learning activities. Feel free to pause the recording now. Again, we've got to be careful that we don't give them too much stuff because there's a lot of material that they have to be studying. Here, you can pause the recording now for this example. Same thing, go ahead and pause the recording, look over this one if you are interested in doing so. Just going to kind of continue on with a little bit more here. All right, and so this is a summary of procedures for promoting specific kinds of learning how to learn, carrying the human dimension, integration, application, and foundational knowledge. So we've talked about these here. We've kind of covered some. I've given some examples related to things that I've done or what I've seen. So let's kind of explore this here. Fink talks about some of these courses in this chapter, and so he solicited ideas from 25 faculty developers on focused version of the question, what could teachers do to determine whether a specific kind of significant learning was occurring or not? And these are described about here. Again, I think these are great things, and I wonder, not knowing OT curriculum, some of these seem like they could be of interest to the OT world. But again, also too, I don't know time-wise. Do you have time to work on learning portfolios? Everybody has time to do some reflections, whether they're short ones or something a little bit larger. Team projects are good. Again, integration writing, reflective writing, it does have a time component to it. The application, we do a lot of these with demonstrations, team projects, case studies, foundational knowledge. We assess those things with pen and paper tests, etc., etc. So the discussion here in this chapter brought forth 2 important points. The first is that as one moves beyond foundational knowledge and application learning, there are assessment procedures available that are valid but not consistently reliable as we'd like. For example, multiple choice tests can be reliable indicators of foundational knowledge, whereas journal writing can be valid but not always a reliable indicator of whether students have come to care about the subject more. And ultimately, we do have to be conscientious that we've got to get people passing their national exam tests. The second point is that some, but not all of these procedures are appropriate in the grading system for the course. In most cases, wanting students to become more excited about the subject and wanting to discover the personal and social implications of the subject are highly desirable learning goals. Nonetheless, you may not want to use them as a basis for assigning the course grade. All right, there's where we're going to stop with things.